At 14:23, on a blistering afternoon in June 1944, the airstrip at Makmerdrome, Bayak Island, shuddered beneath the concussive echo of distant explosions. The runway rippled with heat, shimmering like liquid glass. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled along the sandbag lines as Japanese aircraft dove from altitude, dropping fragmentation bombs that hammered the earth in rolling bursts. But amid the chaos, among the smoke, dust, shouting, and scrambling, 2 American soldiers stood, arguing in the open. Corporal Elias Hart, a wiry, sharp-tongued infantryman with a reputation for doing everything by the book, pointed accusingly at the absurd action being demonstrated by the man opposite him. Private First Class Troy Mercer, a soft-spoken armor who had duct-taped a long wooden rod, salvaged from a broken tent pole, to the side of his M1919 Browning machine gun tripod. It looked ridiculous, improvised, completely non-regulation. And Elias hated everything about it. What is that supposed to be? Elias barked, gesturing at the contraption. A broomstick for morale? A flagpole? A spear? Mercer, have you lost your mind? Mercer didn't flinch. He slid the wooden rod downward, anchoring its tip into the ground. Tightened straps, adjusted angle, calm, methodical, almost surgical despite the chaos around him. It's for recoil dampening, Mercer said quietly. Cuts drift, stabilizes elevation, lets me walk bursts without overcorrecting. Elias threw his hands up. It's a tent pole. It's leverage, Mercer corrected. And leverage keeps us alive. The ground trembled as another bomb detonated behind them. Flaming debris sailed overhead, wreckage from a P-40 Warhawk that had taken a direct hit while lifting off. The aircraft's burning fuselage cartwheeled down the runway, scattering fuel and black smoke across the airstrip. Elias ducked. Mercer didn't. Instead, the armorer finished securing his improvised stabilizer and swung the Browning toward the sky, just as a pair of Japanese Ki-43 Oscars broke formation and began strafing runs across the strip. Elias grabbed Mercer's shoulder. You'll never track fast movers with that stupid stick slowing your pivot. Mercer squeezed the trigger. The M1919 thundered. The stick trembled, and in a surreal moment, as aircraft exploded behind them and tracers stitched the sky, Mercer demonstrated his ridiculous technique. He walked the recoil forward, not back, letting the wooden rod act as an improvised torque brace. The burst stabilized. The climb flattened. His sweeping arc tightened into a clean, surgically controlled line of fire. One of the strafing Oscars wobbled, belched smoke, then erupted into flame above the ridge. Elias froze. Mercer didn't even look up from the sights. He simply murmured, "Told you. Leverage?" And as a second Oscar curved into a diving attack, engine screaming, guns flashing, Elias finally realized something. Mercer's crazy contraption wasn't slowing him down. It was about to become the only thing keeping them alive. The first burst of automatic fire streaked up from the black mouth of the tunnel like angry fireflies, tracers carving orange arcs through the ash. Kersey dropped behind the sandbags as bullets tore across the ridge, snapping past his ear close enough to sting. Owen dug beside him, palms bloody from scraping volcanic rock. Henning's voice thundered from the crater. Contact front. They're coming out of the caves. The Marines of Fox Company scrambled into a ragged firing line. Rifles snapped to shoulders. Bar teams sprinted forward, sliding into position behind mounds of broken concrete. Someone cursed violently as a Japanese round punched through shelter tarp overhead. But Kersey wasn't looking downslope. He was looking at Hodge, who stood frozen, pale, gripping one of his remaining improvised flares like a live explosive. "Hodge," Kersey barked. "Drop that thing and get a rifle." Hodge blinked, not in fear, but in confusion, as if he still hadn't accepted what he'd done. I didn't think they'd see it. I didn't think. You didn't think at all." Kersey snapped. "You lit us up like a Broadway marquee." The next wave of Japanese soldiers erupted from the tunnel. Grenadiers this time, charging uphill with chilling momentum. A knee mortar round arced upward, exploding halfway to the ridge and showering everyone with hot fragments. Owen screamed, "They're pushing left flank." Hennings fired his M1 until the barrel steamed. Kersey, get that wire spool up to the next foxhole. If they cut our comms, we lose artillery. Kersey grabbed his spool and dashed forward, ash flying with each step. Machine gun fire stitched the dirt inches behind him. He dove into a half-collapsed bunker, chest heaving. Inside, 2 Marines clamped a field phone between them, shouting coordinates to the battery rear, requesting he grid reference. Damn it, interference again. Kersey unreeled fresh wire, splicing it onto their line with trembling fingers. Try it now, go. Before they could test it, a deep concussion rolled across the ridge. Not artillery, not mortars. A massive detonation from behind them. The Marines whipped around. A column of white fire had erupted near Fox Company's rear positions. The same unstable flare signature as before, burning too bright, too hot, too violently. Kersey's blood went cold. Hodge, what did you do? The answer came a second later. A panic scream from Hodge himself, echoing across the ridge. Kersey sprinted back through the ash, hurdling debris and shattered crates. The battlefield blurred around him, rifles firing, grenades blasting, shouts echoing. But he only focused on that plume of blinding white fire. He found Hodge kneeling beside a sandbag wall, hands over his helmet, face lit by the glare of another malfunctioning flare cylinder. The thing was burning sideways, not upward, its propellant cooking off in a violent stuttering roar. Hodge yelled. It ignited by itself. I didn't even touch it. Kersey grabbed him, dragging him behind the wall, as the flare let out a final, screaming burst of light. Owen ducked behind them, squinting. They'll see that from Suribachi. Kersey snapped. They're not supposed to see it from here. But the damage was done. Down the slopes, the Japanese assault shifted, voices shouting, bayonets glinting, soldiers breaking off from side tunnels and charging directly toward the new flare blast. They were adjusting their entire attack vector. Hodge's device was luring them like a signal beacon. Hennings crawled over the ash, sliding in beside the group. Kersey, we just intercepted a coded call. They think the flare is a U.S. forward marker. Owen's eyes widened. They think we're calling in reinforcements here? Kersey's throat tightened. If the Japanese believed the Americans were marking a landing zone or rally point, they'd throw everything they had into overrunning the spot before support arrived. The enemy wasn't just coming. They were coming harder, faster, and with purpose, because they thought that flare meant something far bigger than a tinker's experiment. Kersey shook Hodge by the collar. Your invention isn't just a mistake anymore. It's a trigger. You've convinced them there's something here worth killing. Hodge stared up at him, terrified. Then what do we do? Before Kersey could answer, a Japanese officer's whistle cut through the air. Then came the sound no Marine ever forgot. A full, coordinated banzai charge. Hundreds of boots hammering volcanic rock, all converging on Fox Company's exact position. Kersey swallowed hard. We hold, he said, and we pray that flare was the worst surprise you brought us tonight. The banzai charge hit the ridge like a physical shockwave, an avalanche of bodies, steel, and war cries hammering up the volcanic slope. The ground trembled beneath Kersey's boots. Tracer fire slashed the darkness. The unstable flare behind Fox Company still flickered in sickening pulses, throwing long, jagged shadows that made everything look faster, closer, more violent. Hennings grabbed Kersey by the webbing. Left flank is collapsing. Bar team is down. We need someone on that corner or they'll wrap around us. Kersey dragged Hodge and Owen toward the shattered concrete wall that served as their temporary anchor. Japanese grenadiers surged toward them, some crawling low, others sprinting upright through machine gun fire, eyes wild with fury and adrenaline. Owen braced his rifle on a broken rebar post and fired until the bolt locked back. They're not stopping. They're not stopping. Kersey slammed a fresh clip home, firing into the mass. Every shot felt too slow, every breath too short. The enemy charge wasn't disorganized, it was focused, moving directly toward the brightest, hottest point on the ridge. Hodge's flare had painted their position like a runway marker. A fragmentation grenade landed 10 feet away. Kersey grabbed Hodge and threw him behind a slab of concrete as it detonated, showering them with ash and stone. Owen screamed, clutching his arm, blood leaking through his sleeve. Medic. Kersey shouted. No medic came. No medic could come, because the charge widened, splitting like a river hitting rock. Japanese infantry veering around the flare's glow and climbing both sides of the embattled ridge. Hennings yelled, "They're flanking both wings. We need smoke, smoke now." But they had no smoke left. Everything was spent. Everything except. Kersey's eyes darted to Hodge, to the two remaining improvised flare cylinders. Hodge followed his gaze and immediately shook his head. "Kersey, no. No. Those things aren't stable enough for anything but suicide. They burn brighter than anything we've got," Kersey said. "If we can redirect the Japanese, force them to shift toward another point." Owen winced, gripping his bleeding arm. "We buy the ridge time to hold." Hodge's face went slack with fear. "You want to fire those things again?" "On purpose." Kersey grabbed one cylinder. It vibrated faintly unfired, but dangerously reactive. A single misjudged movement and it could detonate in his hand. The smell of unstable magnesium mix burned his nostrils. "We don't have a choice," he said. "You lit the signal. Now we have to mislead them." Hennings overheard and crawled to them, his helmet dented, eyes wide with battle shock. "Where would you send it?" Kersey pointed downslope, not at the enemy, but at a rocky outcrop 50 yards east. "If we throw them a new beacon, something brighter, they might adjust their attack vector again." Hennings nodded slowly. "If it draws even a third of them away, we hold." The dual-engine roar grew louder. Two Oscars sweeping in low from opposite angles, adjusting speed to time their strafing runs, so their burst would intersect directly over Mercer and Elias's position. A coordinated kill box. Elias gripped the stabilizer rod so tightly his knuckles went white. The vibrations were overwhelming, layered, frantic, colliding waveforms of recoil and incoming engine tremor bleeding through the ground. Mercer steadied the Browning, voice calm as ever. "Elias, focus." I can't separate them," Elias stammered. "Too much noise, too many vibrations at once." "You don't need to separate them." Mercer leaned his cheek into the stock. "You only need to find the moment they match." Elias blinked. "You mean when the tremors sink?" Mercer nodded. The dual strafing run depended on the Oscars striking simultaneously. Perfect overlap to saturate the airstrip. If Elias could feel the harmonic alignment, the instant their engine pulses match pitch, they could predict the attack vector precisely. A dangerous gamble, but the only one available. Elias closed his eyes, letting the wooden pole transmit the world's chaos into his hands. At first, it was unbearable, like trying to read two conversations shouted across a battlefield. But then, he felt it. A brief flutter of symmetry, a shared pulse, a single vibration wave traveling perfectly straight down the rod. Elias gasped. Mercer now, they're synced, coming in fast from 7 and 2 o'clock. Mercer swung the Browning toward the nearer approach. Elias felt the rod tug right. "Low," he shouted. Mercer corrected. "Steady, steady." The first Oscar broke over the ridge, guns already spitting fire. Mercer opened up. The Browning hammered in a clean arc, walked upward, caught the Oscar before the pilot had time to react. Rounds punched through the engine cowling, shredding cylinders. Flames erupted along the fuselage, the fighter rolling onto its back as oily black smoke streamed across the sky. But the second Oscar, the one from 2 o'clock, used the destruction as cover. It dove through the burning debris of its wingman, tracer bursts flashing through the falling wreckage like orange sparks. Elias felt the vibration spike. Right, hard right. Mercer pivoted the Browning, but he was milliseconds behind. The Oscar's approach angle was perfect. The pilot had committed fully to the strafing run. "He's got US." Elias shouted. Mercer didn't flinch. He slammed the stabilizer pole deeper into the ground with his boot heel, burying it into the volcanic soil until it would bend into a shallow curve. The meaning hit Elias instantly. "You're tensioning it?" "Mercer, that'll snap." "That's the point." The Oscar lined up, closing fast, spitting tracers into sandbags, ripping them apart. Mercer braced himself, leaned into the Browning, and the stabilizer pole, now bent under tension, vibrated like a drawn bow. Elias felt the building, a tightening tremor, a rising harmonic, a pitch that matched the Oscar's engine burned perfectly. Mercer whispered, "Call it." Elias swallowed hard. Now, Mercer fired. The Browning didn't recoil backward like normal. The tension stabilizer snapped the recoil forward, adding a violent counterforce. The burst leapt upward in a perfect diagonal, a trajectory impossible with a normal tripod, and stitched across the Oscar's nose. The fighter wobbled, overcorrected, and its right wing clipped the top of a wrecked fuel cart. The impact sheared the wing. The Oscar spiraled violently, detonating on the far edge of the runway in a burning crater of sand, steel, and shredded palm. Silence. Then, a new vibration. Subtle, slow, deep. Elias frowned. I don't recognize this one. Mercer's jaw tightened. I do. Over the ridge, a shape emerged, bigger than a fighter, faster than a bomber, dropping into glide. Painted green and black with a red sun fading on its wings. A Key 61 Tony, sleek, armored, and far more dangerous than the fragile Oscars. A rare appearance in the New Guinea theater, fast, agile, and built for slashing attacks. Elias whispered, Mercer, can your technique stop that? Mercer didn't answer, not because he couldn't, but because the vibration in the stabilizer pole had just revealed something far worse. The Tony wasn't alone. A second vibration struck, then a third. A staggered trio of deep pulses. 3 Tonys, all diving toward the airstrip in a coordinated strike. Elias felt his stomach knot. Mercer, there's no way we can hold against that. Mercer adjusted the Browning, staring down the empty anti-air corridor between the ridges. We don't have to hold, he said quietly. What does that mean? Mercer pointed at the stabilizer rod. We only need one shot. Elias swallowed. 1. They're coming in from 3 different angles. What are you planning? Mercer didn't take his eyes off the sky. A convergence kill. Elias's heart lurched. That's impossible. That requires predicting all 3 approach vectors at once. Mercer finally glanced at him. Not if you can feel them. The Tonys began their dive, 3 pistons snarling in murderous harmony, and the stabilizer rod vibrated like a struck bell on the eve of disaster. The 3 Key 61 Tonys descended like blades slicing through the humid Bayak air, sleek, armored, and infinitely more dangerous than the flimsy Oscars that had preceded them. Their engines produced a deeper, tighter growl, the synchronized snarl of high-speed inline pistons tuned for slashing strikes. The sound alone carved tension into the airstrip. Elias's fingers tightened around the stabilizer rod. The vibrations were overwhelming, no longer chaotic, but layered, each Tony producing a different harmonic pulse through the ground. He felt one vibrating fast, sharp, approaching from the northeast, one producing a long, heavy tremor from the west, and one with a stuttering, predatory rhythm approaching directly from the south, the leader. Mercer saw Elias's reaction. You can feel them separately now, can't you? Elias nodded breathlessly. Yes, but how does that help? They're coming in at 3 angles. We can't swing the Browning that fast. Mercer adjusted the tripod legs, angling the Browning not toward one Tony, but toward the empty space between their converging flight paths. Elias froze. Oh no. Mercer, no. That only works if they all cross the same point. Mercer exhaled slowly. That's why it's called the convergence kill. Elias shook his head violently. That's insane. You're trying to hit all 3 planes with one angle of fire. Not hit all 3, Mercer corrected. Make them fly through the same firing solution. Elias stared at him as if he'd gone mad. That requires predicting their combined vectors to the exact millisecond. Mercer slid a hand along the stabilizer pole, fingers lightly brushing the wood. I'm not predicting anything. You are. The rod tells you everything. You're just not trusting it yet. Elias swallowed. The pounding in the rod felt alive, a throbbing map of incoming death. The Tonys dropped lower, sunlight flashing off their canopies, machine guns already flickering. The leading Tony dove straight at them. Its pilot committed to a strafing pass that would cut the Browning team in half. The second Tony swept wide, angling for a crossfire. The third climbed slightly, preparing a fast roll-in from altitude. Elias felt the stabilizer rod suddenly hum in a perfect sine wave rhythm. He gasped. Mercer, they're lining up. All 3 pulses, same frequency. Mercer steadied the Browning. Call drift. Elias placed both hands on the rod. The vibration surged. 3 harmonics warping into a single pulse. The Tonys were entering their attack runs at nearly matched engine RPM to synchronize their impact pattern. Left, Elias shouted. Mercer shifted. Low, lower, steady, steady. The 3 fighters closed in. Perfect predatory arcs converging on a single point. Mercer and Elias. Mercer leaned into the Browning. The rod trembled. The ground vibrated. The air itself seemed to tighten. Now, Elias screamed. Mercer fired. The Browning roared. A sustained burst, not tracking a specific aircraft, but firing through the corridor where all 3 Tonys would cross. The lead Tony streaked into the line of fire, its belly struck by tracers, fuel spraying from ruptured tanks. The second Tony, cutting across from the west, flew directly into the same burst as it swung into its strafing bank, rounds punching through its radiator intake. The third Tony, dropping from above, descended into the upward climb of Mercer's recoil-walked burst, bullets smashing through its wing root. 3 planes, 1 firing line, a perfect convergence. The first Tony exploded instantly, a fireball ripping upward like a volcanic blast. The second Tony erupted into a dark spiral, smoke trailing as it plummeted toward the tree-line. The third Tony's engine tore itself apart midair, the fighter flipping end over end, before crashing into the coastline in a violent plume of sand and surf. Elias fell backward in shock. Mercer, you hit all 3. Mercer lowered the empty Browning, barrel glowing orange. No, he said, breathing hard. We hit all 3. Before Elias could respond, the stabilizer rod vibrated again. A new tremor. Slow, deep, deliberate. Elias frowned. That's not a fighter pulse. Mercer's expression darkened. No, he said quietly. That's a bomber. Over the ridge, a massive shape emerged. A key, 49 Helen twin-engine bomber, descending for a low-level release directly on the airstrip. The Browning's barrel smoked. The feed tray was empty, and Mercer's breathing told Elias the machine gun was done. Burned out, overheated, spent. Elias whispered, we can't shoot. We're out. Mercer, what do we do now? Mercer pressed his palm to the stabilizer rod. Then he said the last thing Elias expected. We collapsed the tripod. Elias stared. What? Mercer kicked the tripod legs, loosening the clamps. The Browning lurched sideways, unstable. Elias panicked. Mercer, we need that. We don't need the gun, Mercer snapped. We need the rod. Elias froze. You're not trying to shoot the bomber. Mercer lifted the wooden stabilizer free from the ground, gripping it like a spear. You're trying to signal it. Mercer nodded. Not signal, he said. Decoy. The massive Helen bomber roared closer, and Mercer stepped forward into open ground. The next decision would decide whether the airstrip lived or died. The Key 49 Helen descended in a shallow glide, its twin engines droning in a low, predatory hum that Elias felt in his bones. The bomber's size dwarfed everything below it. Palm trees, revetments, fuel drums, and the 2 tiny figures standing in the open. One terrified, one impossibly calm. Mercer gripped the stabilizer rod as though testing its weight, its flex, its balance. Elias had no idea what he intended to do, only that there was no weapon left, no Browning burst that could reach the bomber in time. Mercer. Elias shouted over the growing roar of engines. You can't fight a bomber with a stick. Mercer didn't look back, not fighting it. The Helen's bomb bay doors creaked open, too dark, yawning cavities beneath its belly. Shiny casings hung inside, swaying slightly in the turbulence. Elias staggered forward. What are you doing? Mercer stepped farther into the open runway. He lifted the stabilizer rod overhead. At first, Elias thought he must have snapped, fear breaking whatever calm calculation he'd held through the entire fight. But then Elias felt it, through the ground, through the air, through the strange resonance still humming in the wooden pole he held. The bomber's harmonic pulse, slow throbbing, interacted with the rod's natural frequency. Not just sound resonance, optical. Mercer wasn't signaling the bomber. He was tricking it, Elias suddenly understood. You're trying to force a misalignment. Mercer nodded once. The Key 49's bomb sight system, though primitive, relied on maintaining a stable glide angle during release. Any sudden pitch or a shift could throw off the trajectory, causing bombs to release early, late, or wide. And Mercer, with a single vibrating pole placed directly beneath the bomber's path, was trying to create a false ground reference, a visual disruption that made the bombardier think the release angle was shifting when it wasn't. The Helen thundered closer, its shadow swallowing Mercer whole. Elias screamed, "He's too low. Mercer, get out of there." Mercer planted the stabilizer rod upright in the dirt, angled slightly so it caught the bomber's slipstream. The pole vibrated violently, humming with a resonance strong enough to shake Elias's boots. The Helen's nose dipped, corrected, dipped again. Inside the bomber cockpit, the bombardier saw the pole's oscillation, interpreted it as ground rush of false cue, and instinctively adjusted the glide slope. Elias watched in stunned disbelief. He's off course. Mercer, it's working. But it wasn't over. The bomber released its payload. 2 bombs dropped, but the Helen's sudden pitch change had thrown off the timing. The first bomb struck short, slamming into empty sand with a deafening blast. The second bomb, worse aimed, missed the runway entirely and detonated against the coral ridge. A geyser of dirt and smoke erupted into the sky. The Helen pilot, realizing the run had failed, advanced throttle and tried to climb out, but his altitude was too low, his airspeed bleeding from the force correction. Elias felt the stabilizer rod in his hands vibrate a new rhythm, a rising oscillation of strain. He looked up. The bomber was struggling, losing lift. "He can't pull out." Elias shouted. Mercer covered his head and ran, diving behind sandbags. The Helen's left wing clipped a tree line, spun, and the entire bomber smashed into the far end of the airstrip in a rolling fireball that shook the earth. A gust of heat washed over the runway as debris clattered down like hot rain. Then silence. Long, heavy silence. Elias crawled toward Mercer. "Mercer, you absolute lunatic. You made the bombardier misjudge the drop." Mercer sat up, coughing dust. Every pilot trusts the ground more than their gauges. "I just gave him the wrong ground." Elias laughed in disbelief. Half panic, half awe. "You saved the entire damn airstrip with nothing but a machine gun, a piece of wood, and physics." Mercer shrugged weakly. "Mostly physics." Before Elias could respond, the stabilizer rod, buried at a crooked angle, finally cracked under residual strain. Snap. The top half fell, bouncing in the dust beside them. A simple piece of wood, now split and useless. But it had done its job, as medics, mechanics, and infantrymen emerged from trenches and revetments, staring at the burning wreckage of the bomber. Elias grabbed the fractured rod and held it up like a relic. "This," he said breathlessly, "belongs in a museum." Mercer shook his head. "Nah, it was just a tool. Tomorrow we'll make a better one." Elias blinked. "Tomorrow?" Mercer glanced at the sky as distant engines rumbled beyond the far ridge. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we're not done." When the smoke finally drifted off the runway and the last pieces of the shattered Key 49 Helen simmered into silence, the men of Marksman Drome realized something unusual. The attack had been repelled, not by coordinated AA fire, not by fighter cover, not by hardened emplacements or tactical doctrine, but by 2 men, 1 Browning machine gun, and a broken tent pole. Medics dragged the injured to the aid station. Mechanics ran hands over the cratered runway. Officers barked for damage reports and ammunition counts. But everywhere Elias and Mercer walked, heads turned, conversation stopped. Men pointed, not at the burning wreckage, but at the jagged wooden stabilizer rod Elias carried under his arm. Word spread faster than the black smoke. They used a pole to time the strafing runs. They hit 3 Tonys with 1 burst. They made the bomber drop short. You're kidding, 2 guys with a Browning did all that? But none of the attention mattered to Mercer. He sat on a crate near a half-dug trench, cleaning dust out of the Browning's feed tray with slow, methodical strokes. Elias sat beside him, still coming down from the adrenaline, fingers tracing the cracked stabilizer rod like something holy. You know, Elias said softly, I thought you were out of your mind. A 10-pole stabilizer? A convergence kill? Decoying a bomber with a vibrating stick. Mercer blew metal shavings off the bolt assembly. Crazy ideas work better when you don't tell anyone they're crazy. Elias laughed. How did you even think of that technique? Mercer shrugged. My old man was a carpenter. He always said with talks, if you know how to listen, every vibration means something. Wind, weight, stress, balance. I just applied it to recoil. Elias stared at him, speechless. Down the runway, officers were already marking bomb craters and correcting field maps. By the time the after-action reports were typed up, the official record would say, enemy air attack repelled by ground machine gun fire, effective leadership, and rapid adjustment of defensive positions. No mention of improvised engineering. No mention of a stabilizer rod. No mention of resonance timing or harmonics. No mention of the insane, brilliant technique that saved the airstrip. But the men who fought there remembered, not as myth, not as rumor, but as the day a quiet armorer used physics, intuition, and pure nerve to push back against odds that should have crushed them. In the months after the Bayak campaign, Mercer rotated to rear echelon armory duty. Elias went on to fight through the Philippines. They wrote letters, traded stories, and joked about starting a carpentry business after the war. But the stabilizer rod, burnt, split, and permanently bowed, survived. Elias donated it decades later to a small aviation museum in Oregon. It sits in a glass case, unlabeled except for a handwritten note, used in an improvised anti-aircraft technique, 1944. Don't underestimate simple tools. Visitors pass it every day without knowing what it meant. How close the airstrip came to annihilation. How two soldiers argued their way into a miracle. And how listening to the earth through a piece would shape the fate of a battlefield. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps bring forgotten acts of courage back into the light. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family served in the Pacific Theater. And if you enjoy these cinematic war stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.